if you don't know who Interworks are, we're a full stack data consultancy, and we like having conversations about what's stopping you getting the data you need in a timely manner to answer the questions that you have. We work across all of these different areas, and for NHS England, we're helping with the infrastructure around their Tableau server. We're helping building some dashboards, and in terms of enablement, we're giving a lot of these webinars across many different topics, and they're all being recorded as well. So a lot of them were relating to specific things within Tableau Desktop, and so maybe you're not using Tableau yet, but they'll be good to go back to once you've started using Tableau. And as Vicky mentioned, we do a lot of work in healthcare. We've worked with health and social care partnerships, with foundation trusts, with clinical commissioning groups and local authorities. And so if you want to have a conversation about how they've improved their use of Tableau, or they've improved the amount of insight they can get from their data, feel free to get in touch after the course. I'll provide my email at the end of the presentation. What I'd like to talk about today is why people use Microsoft Excel. I think it's a fantastic tool. It's a Swiss Army knife of Tableau, of software, and so there's loads of reasons and loads of scenarios in which we'd use it. But we should also talk about why we've visualized data, especially in terms of the speed to insight. So we want our end users to understand the metrics and the implications of a certain value as fast as possible. We don't want them to have to struggle through reams and reams of tables full of numbers. We want to visualize that data so they can pick out trends easily. So we'll talk about why and what techniques we have available to us to do that. And we're obviously going to talk about how to visualize data within Tableau. And I think what's probably one of the more useful parts of this is to actually see what I'm talking about in the flesh. So there's a couple of scenarios that I'm going to walk you through whereby we had an Excel report that was maybe not fit for purpose, or we had an Excel report that was heavily reliant on a lot of manual processes. And we used Tableau, sorry, to improve the awareness and the insight within that data. So we improved like how easy it was to get to the thing that was most important from that data. Vicky gave me a quick introduction, a couple of extra notes. I've been working for Interworks for 5 years now, and I've had Tableau since 2012. So in a previous job, I had Tableau, but in that job and in the job before that, I was this guy. My wife bought me this mug, I think a couple of weeks into one of those jobs when I was actually working for Bolton Council, just so that everybody in the office knew that I was a nerd. I think that was why she bought it. But I was fully invested in Excel, building VBA scripts so that I could automatically refresh data sources, perform data validation checks, update all my hundreds of pivot tables that then fed a interactive dashboard where people could apply filters and see changes in those charts. So don't take me wrong when I'm talking about kind of when to use Excel and Tableau. I'm not saying we should never use Excel. I think it's a great tool, but it's not always the right tool for every scenario, and it's not always the easiest tool to use, especially when we're talking about VBA. So that's the kind of entry pitch. I'm not here to slam Excel. I absolutely love it. But why might you be attending? You may be someone who performs analysis, you create like data products for other people, and you've got access to Tableau Desktop, but maybe you're not using it. Maybe you'll default to Excel as often as possible because you're under time pressure and you know how to use Excel already. And if someone asks for something, you know exactly how to do it in Excel. You might not yet know how to do the same thing in Tableau, so that's kind of becoming a barrier to people adopting Tableau more in your organization. Alternatively, it could be someone who receives those reports. You're the person who has to then action that information. And your organization, if you're working for NHS England or NHSI, then you've got a Tableau server. And so you could be receiving data in a more visual format, and you could be getting that data sent to you on a schedule so that you're not relying on a member of your team to manually create something or update something and send it on to you. And then you've got multiple versions of the same report. You could have this one version of the truth sat on the Tableau server that's scheduled to automatically be sent to you every Monday, every day, every 2 hours or something. So maybe you fall into one of those groups, or you might just be here for some other reason that I've not anticipated. But is there a problem at all? If we're talking about building repeatable dashboard, so something that someone is going to refer to on a daily basis, an hourly basis, or a weekly basis, then we want to make sure that that takes up as least time as possible for everyone, or as a small amount of time for everyone as possible. So the person creating that report and the person receiving that report and trying to understand the insights, or kind of understand what that report's saying. And so if we're using the wrong tool for that, we could be introducing manual steps that don't need to be there. And if we're not presenting that in a visual way, it means that the person receiving that report isn't getting that information as efficiently as possible. And so by not moving on to using data visualization, we're not making that the norm. And so I'm going to show you in a few minutes like why data visualization is an efficient way of getting information across. And so if you're still stuck using like tabular displays of information, or you may be creating charts in Excel, but it's not necessarily intuitive to do that, and it takes a few extra steps. And so that's a time sink for you. And then if you have to repeat that process again when new data comes in, you're creating extra work for yourself. And so by reducing user adoption of data visualization, we're kind of holding everyone back from this, I'm going to say utopia, but this being like a data-driven organization that gets information quickly and efficiently. Just a little caveat, in case you're about to switch off and say, I love Excel, don't take it away from me. I couldn't if I tried, and I wouldn't want to either. So stick with it. Why do people use Excel so much? The reason is because it can do loads and loads and loads of different things. It is what we like to call a hybrid tool. So you can store data in Excel. You can store up to 1 million rows worth of data in Excel. But that doesn't mean that Excel is the best place to store data. There is an entire sector of technology devoted to storing data. And none of the people working in that sector are going to tell you that Excel is the best place to store data. They'll talk about data lakes, they'll talk about data warehouses, all of these different things that are a better place to store your data. And you can build reports in Tableau, in Microsoft Excel. You can build interactive reports in Microsoft Excel if you like getting involved with VBA. It doesn't mean that from the ground up, Excel was built to be a reporting tool. So there's always going to be things that take longer in Excel that are native functions in a data visualization tool. I mean, Microsoft have basically acknowledged that by having Power BI. They acknowledge that Excel isn't the place that is best to build your reports. You can do it, and that's why it's so ubiquitous, is because it can be all of these things in one. And so that makes it so useful. It makes it really, really handy. So, but it doesn't mean that it is the best for either of these two things. But what is it good at? So people like it because it is everywhere. Anyone who's worked in any office will have used a spreadsheet. And with that familiarity builds confidence, and confidence is really important, and it is one of the things that is a hurdle to new tools, because if something is new, people don't have confidence in it, and they don't have confidence in their ability to understand or to be to think that they've got the right results, or that they're showing the right information, because they've not got the familiarity that they may have with legacy tools. But one of the best things about it is that you can just build a data set. You can't use Tableau to create data. Tableau is a consumer of data. So in that respect, if you just wanted to knock up a spreadsheet that had 2 years worth of individual day values in it, and you wanted to, maybe you're modeling something and you wanted to just drop in some random numbers, that's 2 formulas and a couple of double clicks. It's extremely useful for doing that sort of thing. There are endless add-in tools for Excel for any purpose. It's amazing how many are out there. Microsoft have their own ones like Power Pivot and Power Query, but there's loads of them for different statistical processes, and a lot of those you might not find in a data visualization tool. And this is one of the things that you won't find in data visualization tools. You won't be able to take a single cell and do a double underline of that one cell. There are ways to draw attention to numbers, which is what you're doing by doing that double underline. But if you need that double underline in your life, that's not what you can do in a data visualization tool. So we'll talk about like why you might want to do that. And like my conversation is always, if someone asks me, you know, can I underline this single cell in Tableau? My question is why? What are you trying to do? If it's to draw attention to it, then we have other ways of doing that. And so it's, when you're moving from one tool to the other, it's about trying to figure out why you would do something in the other tool rather than focusing on what it can't do. So the same outcome of drawing attention to a value can be achieved in a whole heap of different ways. You've just got to stop thinking about it in absolutes in terms of, but I want a double underline. I've said easy data visualization. What I kind of mean by that is it's familiar, and so everybody knows in Excel how to apply a filter. I want to check to see whether this particular value is in my table. I can just bang a filter on there and have a quick check. So that familiarity breeds confidence. You can absolutely do data validation in databases and in data visualization tools. It's just, it might not be immediately, it might not be something that you know how to do straight away. So you will fall back onto that validation in the tool that you are confident and familiar with. I don't like to be negative, so we won't say too much along these lines, but there are data limits. So 1 million rows is not a lot these days. A website can create that in an hour, less than, depending on what the website is. And again, it's not designed as a place to store data. It's one of the things that it can do, but it's not designed to store data. And so for that reason, we've got limitations like the 255 characters per cell. So that's not going to fit, you know, purposes if we're trying to collect like comments from a website or something like that. I mentioned this before, so it's, unless you are very good at VBA, which is not intuitive. So a lot of people come to us saying, yeah, but I can do this with VBA. And it's like, well, you can, but not everybody can. And so if you're learning a new tool, if you say to someone, immediately get straight into if and for loops within some code, that's not an intuitive thing for them to do. Some people love it. I'm of that ilk, but it doesn't mean that it's intuitive for people. So there will usually be manual processes for the majority of people. And like I said, you need the VBA, which isn't necessarily super easy. And if we're talking spinning wheels and, you know, 30% complete using 4 cores or using 2 cores or something when you're trying to copy a formula down, this is because Excel is a desktop tool. It uses your own local resources. So any data querying that you're doing or any formulas that you're adding, anything that you're kind of creating is completely dependent upon the CPU and the RAM of your machine, which and I've seen a wide variety of specifications of machines across healthcare organizations, and they're not always the fastest ones you can get. And so you'll get workbooks that crash. You'll get formulas that take, minutes to run. Whereas if we're looking at a tool like Tableau, we've pushed that processing power to the place where there's a tool that is designed specifically for retrieving data and processing calculations, which is your data warehouse, especially if we're talking these newer multi-parallel like in-memory processing, like cloud warehouses that will automatically expand in terms of the number of like computing nodes, and you can get, billions of rows of data analyzed in seconds. So that technology exists, and so we should be leaning on that technology and using it for what it's good at, rather than relying on a local machine. Little bugbear of mine, I've kind of hidden some names to protect the innocent, but when I come to convert an Excel report into a Tableau dashboard, I'll find loads of these kind of things. And if something like this goes wrong, trying to understand where that is coming from, if you're not the report builder, is really tricky. And so when I spoke to one of my colleagues, I said, what's the best thing about Excel? And he's like, you can go in and change any cell and any column that you want to, and you've got complete control over every single cell and every single header. And I said, okay, what's the worst thing about it? He's like, you've got complete control over every cell and every header within your workbook. So there's this inbuilt fragility, because anybody can change anything in your worksheet. And there are downstream consequences with monster calculations like this, or monster calculations like this. These came from the same workbook. So it's not like data sources, like data warehouses, they have built-in protection so that you can't manually go in and change things unless you have a very elevated level of permissions. That's for a good reason, is because there are downstream consequences of changing table structures, of changing cell values. So again, Tableau, Excel can be used for these things, but it doesn't mean it's the best tool for the job. Its strength is because it's just so versatile, but it doesn't mean it's the best tool. So I mentioned we were going to talk about visualizing data, and why should we? It's for this one reason only. We should get the insight to our end users in the most efficient way possible. Why are we asking someone to read a big table of numbers where we can make it really clear what they should be focusing on? There's a whole heap of visual properties that we can utilize in our charts, and they're called pre-attentive attributes. Well, sorry, some of the visual properties are pre-attentive, which means that before we've even had a second to think about what is on the screen or page, our brain has already told us that this bar is longer than this one, this color is different to this one, this shape is different to this one, this point is further along this vertical axis than the other one. You haven't had to consciously think, I wonder if this value is larger than the other one, because immediately before you have even paid any attention to that chart, your brain has said, that's longer than that. So we can leverage these to make our end users get the information as fast and as efficiently as possible. These are our pre-attentive attributes, and if we're talking about quantitative data, these are the two kind of gold standards, because not only can you see that that bar is longer than all the others, you can probably see that it's about 20% longer, and you haven't had to think about that. It's automatically processed by the brain. There's lots of, these are the attributes that are processed before we've had to think about them. You can also use color intensity or gradient, the size of your data points, the width of your data points, to show quantitative values, but they're not as efficient. It's pre-attentive, but you don't get the same accuracy in deciding the difference, the relative difference in value. You can, it's more like you can see the order of the values. So I know that there's one that's larger than the rest, but I'd be guessing at how much. And if we're talking about categorical data, or qualitative values, you instantly see that there are different shapes and different colors. And so we can leverage this, we can draw people's attention, we can do things like using associative colors. So colors that people automatically associate with something negative or positive, we can use those so people don't have to reference a color legend in your view to understand that this color means there's an alarm here, we should be paying attention to it. So we can leverage those things to get our information across as quickly as possible. And yes, we can build all these charts in Excel, but it doesn't mean that it's set up to be the best at building those charts fast and intuitively. So this is why we should visualize data, and we should use a tool that is built from the ground up to default to visualizing data and to make that make it very easy. And for things like interactivity to be a default setting. So let's take just a very quick example. I've got data here. Every single row is a complaint made about a product that a company has provided relating to banking. So if I've got a question, which product generated the most complaints, I'd drop that into a pivot table probably and present this to someone. Maybe I'd sort it to make it easier, but effectively they can very quickly find the top three and probably in a few seconds figure out like the relative difference between them. But if I gave them this chart, they'd immediately see that top three and see that it's probably between 10 and 20% larger mortgage than debt collection, and I'm guessing about another 20% bigger between credit reporting and debt reporting, and then bank account and service is just over half of the credit reporting. And I've not had to look at any numbers to do that. I've not had to perform any mathematical functions in my brain. I've just seen the length of these bars. So it's that relative difference in the length that is instantly processed by your brain. And the same thing if we're trying to pick out a trend. So for the top 5 companies, am I getting more or less complaints over time? More or fewer? If I show that as a table, it's tricky to pick out that trend. Picking out trends and patterns is what data visualization does. And so we should be trying to visualize data where possible. And we can be providing these clues visually so that people can get to the question or the answer to the question as fast as possible. What's Tableau good at? Visualizing data. It was built for this sole purpose, to visualize data. So if you agree that visualizing data is better than showing it in numerical format, and you want to visualize your data, and you've got Excel on your computer and you've got Tableau, one of those tools is built solely for that purpose. So you should use that tool. If you don't want to visualize data, then fine, use your spreadsheet. But if you want to visualize data, Tableau is built solely for that purpose. And it's got other benefits too. It's not just built for that purpose, it's very good at that purpose. But also because it is a consumer of data, it doesn't store data unless we're talking about data extracts. There's no limit on the amount of data. So Facebook, Google, they have petabytes of data. They use Tableau to analyze that data, or to visualize that data, sorry. And once we've built our dashboard, if we've got that pointing to a data source that will update automatically, then we don't have to do anything to that dashboard. We publish it to the server to share it with our colleagues, and we never have to change that dashboard unless someone wants to add in more content. It will always read the data source, and if the data source has more rows in it, those rows are automatically brought into your dashboard. So there's no, I've created this report for my boss and now they want this same report every month, so I've now got a monthly task. You haven't. All you do is set them up a subscription that emails them that report, that dashboard every Monday to remind them that, hey, this exists and you wanted it, so let's have a look. And you don't get this scenario. I don't know if anybody else has this. I don't think I'm alone. But I have, in my previous work, I have spent hours and hours trying to figure out why this manager's workbook or their report, why their numbers are different to the one that we've just sent out to the client or the one that we've just sent out to a different manager. And it's usually something like they've removed a row in the data that was an anomaly, or they have refreshed their data 3 days ago, whereas we updated ours yesterday. If both of those reports were pointing at the same data source hosted on our Tableau server, for example, that is verified by the data owners, that is then refreshed on a schedule by the Tableau server automatically, it means that everybody is singing from the same hymn sheet. There is none of that extra work involved in trying to figure out why this person's report doesn't match this person's report. And one of Tableau's main selling points is, can you connect to data sources from, like, there's loads and loads of data connectors. There's over 80 native data connectors. So you're not building ODBC connectors, or you're not having to migrate your data elsewhere. You can go straight to Salesforce and get your data. You don't have to put it in a database if you don't want to. But not only can you can connect to data from anywhere, you can connect those data sources together. Let's say you've got a Microsoft SQL warehouse that has most of your data, but it doesn't have this one CSV file that you had to get from a different system. You don't have to go to your DBAs and try and get that CSV file like automatically added to the data warehouse. You can join them like they were tables in the same database by using the cross-database joins. So you can not only connect to data from everywhere, you can combine those into single data sources, into single data sets. And it is built to have interactivity. So I mentioned using VBA, using like, is it ActiveX buttons? I can't remember, it's been a long time. But having to kind of add these buttons in and attach like scripts to them that will perform interactivity within Excel. In Tableau, if you want to have the users click on a data point within one visualization and affect the rest of your dashboard, you just click a button and it does that. If you want that to be, if you want more control over that, you say, I don't want it to affect sheet A, but I want it to affect sheet B, then you just go to a menu item and open up your dashboard actions. You're 3 clicks away from having full control over that interactivity. You don't have to write any code. It's very straightforward and it's very intuitive. That's because it's built for that purpose. Excel isn't built for this purpose. You can do it. It's not built solely for that purpose. So when someone comes to you and says, I've heard about Tableau now, can you replicate this Excel report exactly as it looks in Excel, but put it into Tableau so that it's on the Tableau server? If that's the case, you're not going to have a good time because you don't have that cell level control that Excel does. What should you do in that scenario? I've heard all sorts of responses from Tableau is terrible, Tableau is rubbish, why, I can't use it, I'm just going to use Excel instead. But you should take a step back, or I'm not telling you what you should do. In my experience, what's beneficial is to take a step back and ask the person, what do you use this report for? What is the information that you are trying to glean from these numbers? Because once you have that information, you can say, okay, I'm going to focus on those key metrics that you want to assess. I'm going to give you context around those numbers. I'm going to tell you in large text or in a different color whether you are better than the previous period or whether you are better to how that compares to your budget or your plan or your target. And I'm going to redesign this so that those things are front and center, and I'm going to summarize that. I'm not going to give you every single row level value that you had in your Excel report because it's too much information. I'm going to summarize this and then allow you different levels of detail according to like what you want to look at. I'm not going to give you all of the detail and then make you sift through it for the pieces you want. I'm going to summarize and say, if you want to click on this data point, you can get more information about that. But I'm not going to give you that from the start because it's too much. So I've talked about that. So I feel like I should show you that in a couple of examples. I imagine many of you, if you're working in the NHS, you may have been involved in like local care organisation meetings, multi-agency partnership meetings where you have a bunch of success indicators that you discuss with people from other providers or other kind of stakeholders. And so in that scenario, you may have something like this, where we've got our performance for the last few months, and we've got that grouped into different frameworks. So lots of different frameworks, lots of different indicators, and we're trying to, in this meeting, we want to meet as many of these targets as possible. We want to improve the outcomes for the people we're serving. And so my question was, so what do you want to know from this? What's important? And the answer was, well, you know, we need to know what we should be talking about. What indicators are failing and which ones can we actually improve? Which ones have we got a chance to improve? One of the people attending the course said we sometimes lose all the time in the meeting with people talking about the indicators they're responsible for and where they've kind of met them and all the good work that they've done. But what we should be focusing on is the ones that we can move from off target to on target. And so I said, well, how many targets are you meeting at the moment? And I couldn't get the answer from this spreadsheet. I'd have to go through line by line and say, okay, so we're hitting that one, we're missing that one. So that's, so I don't like, okay, we're hitting all of these, that's good. We're missing these. So like trying to count how many, that there was nowhere in this report does it tell us how many indicators we're missing and which of these frameworks we should be discussing first, because I don't know, because it's all just a bunch of red and green numbers. So that's what I mean by taking a step back and saying, well, what are you using this for? So that I know when I design my dashboard, I can give you that information as efficiently as possible. Now, I built this a few years ago. I'd probably design it differently now, but effectively, what's important in this information? How many targets have we missed? And so how are we doing compared to, are we doing better than last week? Do we congratulate ourselves, or do we say, well, we could be doing better? We've got an increase, so that's bad. And what proportion of our targets are we missing overall? I could not get that information in 10 minutes from the report that was given to me. So I was trying to give them that information as quickly as possible. And so the second problem was people talk about things that aren't necessarily going to improve our monitoring of these targets or make us hit these targets quicker. So what should we be talking about? Probably the framework that's missing the highest proportion of its targets. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that at the top. I'm going to order these frameworks by the proportion of targets they're missing so that we can spend the limited time we have. You're all very busy people. We've got to spend that time talking about the things that we can change and the area that we can get the most improvement. So it's got to be this one where we're hitting the fewest targets. And so because there's out of the box interactivity, you want to see the worst 10 performing in that framework. Here they are. But crucially, I'm allowing that drill down. So you'll always get this complaint that, yeah, but I need to see the numbers. This is just a bar chart. I don't know the numbers. I'm like, okay, well, let me give you those numbers in a manageable amount. So allow this drill down to show more information. Okay, at a glance, we can see which targets we should be looking at. I don't have to read 14 lots of the last 12 months worth of data to try and figure that out. I can see immediately that we're really close to this target. Maybe we should talk about that one. We're missing this one, but we have actually achieved this in the past. It's only the last 2 periods where we've missed it. So we know this is achievable. So let's talk about how to get that one back on track. Low-hanging fruit. So we're able to hit these targets, or we're really close to this target. So let's focus on that and what interventions we can do that are going to get us over the line and get that target met. So again, yeah, but I need to see the numbers. Okay, you can have your numbers once you've drilled down to a sufficiently small amount of data. So if I was to give them 14 lots of this many numbers, it's too much to take in. But what I can do is, for the indicator you are concerned with at that moment, have the numbers. We can insert visualizations into our tooltips. That's this box that pops up. And so you can embed information at the level that people are discussing at that time. There's no point in giving them everything all at once, because as I showed you with that spreadsheet, you can't get the answers you're looking for. It takes too long. But in this way, we can say, what's the most important thing? How many targets have we missed? Let's drill down into why we've missed all those targets. This has got too many targets, so we're going to we're going to allow people to say, well, let's only look at the ones we've not achieved, and let's maybe just look at one of these families at once. Let's look at assurance only, so that we've got a manageable amount of information to talk about. Adding this interactivity in is native functionality in a data visualization tool like Tableau. So I've got another example, and then we can see if anyone's got any questions. So the other example was one I'm quite pleased about, because finance are the people who will cling on to Excel with their dear life. Like, it is how they've been built in accounting, to spreadsheets. The work I did for this was a clinical commissioning group, but the work I did for them was done on their machine. So I've recreated this randomly from memory, because guess what? Excel's great at creating fake data. And so they had a spreadsheet that looks roughly like this, where overall we were looking at the amount of money that providers have claimed from us, because we're the clinical commissioning group for healthcare, and the amount we thought that was going to that we were going to spend this month, or this year to date, and what's that difference? And then that's grouped by department. And we've got things like projections, we've got forecasts, and they do like manual adjustments, whereby if someone was in the hospital for a really long time in intensive care and they came out this month, it means that they get charged that month for this single patient stay that was much more expensive than a usual kind of like monthly churn of patients would be. And so they removed that from their forecast, because it would be an anomaly to include it. They do the same thing for activity that they do for cost. But the problem with this spreadsheet was, firstly, it was a manual update. Those massive sum if calculations came from this spreadsheet. It took them days to kind of prepare this. And when they wanted to understand why, so for example, in my fake data, I'm £181,000 over my plan. If I want to figure out why that is, I've got to go to, maybe I'd go to individual provider versions of this. So they had tabs for every single provider, of which there's about 10. And then I've got to click on a cell and go, okay, let's go and find that provider in the data. So they go to the data tab, and they'd filter for that provider, they'd filter for that department, and then they'd sort it, so they'd have to find that. And this is a lot of manual work to understand what's behind a data point. So I've got the kind of designs that we did for this provider, for this clinical commissioning group. So obviously this is also, these numbers are all the same, so you know that they're fake. And okay, let's zoom in a little bit. So now we've got, we can kind of see what's the main story. This is how are we doing against our planned value? Let's look at the variance for the year, and let's look at kind of the forecast for the next few months. But critically within this, and why this is kind of saving them time, is that if they want to investigate this data point, they're saying, okay, we're over plan for A&E this month. Why? They can click on this bar. If they select that bar, it's going to take them to this worksheet, or this Tableau workbook. And in here, we can see how that value has changed over time. So we can see, well, actually, every September, we always get a spike. So, or this is a blip, whereas normally we're below plan. Or, this was the same last year, so maybe it's something that we need to build into the forecast for next year. But critically, they don't have to go digging in the data to find out what items, what individual procedures were creating that difference in their plan to their price value. They can get it from here. They don't have to go digging into the data. If they want to, they can then click on one of these bars and see the row level values, but largely they don't have to. They can explain it from this point. And another thing that would take loads more work in Excel, we've got this filter here. So we don't have extra tabs for every single provider. We've just got a filter. If they wanted to group up their providers and see, well, actually, how am I doing against my plan for these two providers together, they'd have to do some addition across different worksheets to make that happen. In this view, they can just click the filter item and select those two providers together and get the aggregated view. And another thing that was a massive time saver was this grouping here is changeable. So they had different worksheets that did different groupings. So for example, there's different ways of grouping these items together. There's also different ways of aggregating it. So there's a higher level that maybe puts like these two together, puts these three together or something like that. And all they've got now is they've just got a button that says, do you want to go down a level or up a level, or do you want to group it by something else? So we've got a single place that serves that purpose. We don't have separate worksheets that need to be maintained separately. So we're not only making their speed to insights quicker, but we're also making the maintenance of this, because this points to a database, so there's no manual process now. They just add their adjustments into a separate spreadsheet that gets pulled into the database. That's the sole amount of work they have to do compared to creating this from scratch every month. Well, not from scratch, but using the formulas and copy and pasting data in, which can lead to errors and that sort of thing. So hopefully that gives you a couple of decent examples and leads you to some questions. So let me jump back to the presentation. And this is my email address if you want to speak to me, if you've got any questions about the work that we've done. But that's it for the presentation. So I'll hand you back to Vicky to run the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Steve. I appreciate that. We've finished just about on schedule, so we've got 15 minutes left of this call. If you do have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat panel. There are quite a few of us on this call, so if you're feeling brave, please take a moment to unmute your line and ask any question that you may have. We'll leave the call open for a few more minutes, so if you do have a question, please feel free to ask that now.
I think I may ask a question. My name's Jabbar. I work
Jabbar.
for. Hiya. Thank you for the presentation. It was really useful. Thank you, Steve, for that as well. So my questions are around. I work for Content Rugby CCG. My questions are around sort of using multiple data sources in Tableau. I've sort of used it a little bit in this role, and I've struggled with getting two different data sources in the same report. And I guess my question is, are we able to do that without joining all the fields? Trying to have, I think Steve mentioned in his presentation that it tries to create a single data set. Is there a way we can have sort of multiple data sets not joining?
Absolutely, yeah. There's two different ways. Normally, with Tableau, it's advantageous to have your data in a single source because you've got the full functionality of all of the calculated fields. But obviously, if your data is at different levels of aggregation, it doesn't make sense to join it. Maybe joining is going to create duplication that you don't want to have to deal with later, or it would create kind of, you'd be repeating the same value all the time. In that scenario, we'd use data blending. So this is where you set up a loose relationship between the two so that it enables filtering and enables you to get the right value for the right like dimension item that's in the view, but it's not a join. You don't materialize a new result set. You have two separate connections, but you're using metrics from both of them in a single worksheet. So data blending is what you're looking for.
And is the blending as accurate as a join? I mean, is it like a fuzzy join, a blend, or is it sort of, if I'm sort of trying to blend two fields together, would it be an exact match?
Yeah, it would be an exact match. And if the members of that field aren't the same, then it won't pick up the like the value won't be matched across. It doesn't. What I mean by it doesn't create a join in that it doesn't then create a completely separate result set. They stay independent, but let's say, for example, you had a list of clinical commissioning groups, and as maybe you've got the mapping polygons for them, and then you've got a separate data set that has a load of indicators blended together. In that separate data set, if you've got the CCG code and you've got the CCG code in your polygon data set, that's what you set the blend up to be, and you can bring the numbers in and you've got your spatial file separate. So yeah, it'll match like that, but it won't materialize a joined result set.
Okay.
It'll kind of it's at the worksheet level rather than the data source level.
Yeah, props. Thank you, Steve.
Jabbar, just on that, you asked quite a poignant question. So our next webinar, which is running on the 9th of October, is going to look at data connection, joins, blends, which is probably perfect for you. So I've sent you details of that privately, and for everybody else, that's a link to sign up for the next webinar on the 9th of October is available in the chat panel. We will also be sending invites across to you shortly. So any other questions whilst we've got some additional time?
Okay, we've got a question from Danny in the chat, which is, some customers like to see the data that sits behind the dashboard. Absolutely, yeah. So how to do this, and is there a download button? So I'll tell you what, let me open up an example of that quickly because my screen is still sharing. Let's go here. So if I grab our server, so if you've got a server hosted data set, or sorry, a server hosted workbook, let me go and find one that has something. Thank God. Okay, let's look at this one. So there are a number of different ways to allow that to happen. So basically within the Tableau server, you can set people's permissions and you decide what they're able to do. And one of those is download the data behind a worksheet. Now you can do that for a single data point. So you'll see this icon appears quite a lot within Tableau. And so, for example, if someone wanted the rows of data behind this southeast assets, then they could click this button, the window opens, and the Tableau server administrator, or you as the person who publishes the dashboard, determine like what can people do. Are you going to allow them to see the full data, and in which case they can look at all the columns and download the data behind that data point. We can make this more intuitive by adding in buttons as well. So one of the things you can do within a Tableau dashboard is you've got this export thing here. So this is a button that I could, if I just grab that floating and drag it in, I've got an option here to enable them to export this to PDF, PowerPoint, or as an image. So if they wanted the chart, they could do it this way. If you want to kind of download, if you create a table of data like this, for example, and you want them to download this table, we've got that download option here as well. So crosstab is the table, data is the data behind the data point. So crosstab here, and I can choose which of these do I want to get. So it's the top financial advisors is the one I wanted. So I'll download that, and now I've got that as a CSV file. So yeah, you can export the data if you want to.
Thank you for that, Steve. So in the dashboard, say in that example that you looked at, if you were to click and show the patient level data or the data behind that, I find it quite difficult to display just a basic table in Tableau. That might be I'm fairly new to it, so that just might be me, that I find it quite difficult to do some of the more basic things that I can do in Excel in Tableau.
Yeah, so it's a very common scenario. Wanting to kind of have full control over tables. So obviously within Excel, you've got complete control over any column and any cell that you want. There are limitations within Tableau because it's not built as a spreadsheet tool. So if you're building tables, then it for me, I kind of if you're using Tableau to build a whole series of tables, it's not being used for its best purpose. So we should be having a few levels of summary before we actually get to an individual table. And so if you're talking about providing patient level information, it should be at like a subset level, so that we're maybe looking at just one ward's level of patients rather than like hundreds and hundreds of them. So what was it about the table that you couldn't build? So what were you expecting, and compared to kind of what Tableau delivered?
I think it's just the presentation of it.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's not as much control. Effectively, you can format your headers, you can have a whole series of numbers in there as well, but you don't get as much control. So that's not something that's going to change specifically. There's lots of kind of techniques. So one of them's called scaffolding, and this is where if you want to have, for example, a column that has an up and down arrow, and then you want that next to a column that has a number, and then you want that next to a column that has a piece of text, you can actually create axes in which to hold those, so that you've got full control over what the shape is and what the what the color of that data point is. So there are little tricks like that, but it isn't designed to have that full control.
Thank you for answering that.
It's okay. If you've got like questions, you've got like my email address is here. So if there's a specific one that you want to ask me, then fine, feel free to email. Kirsty's got a question saying, have you used Tableau for qualitative data like survey? Absolutely, yeah. There's lots of examples. If you go to like Tableau, if you Google Tableau and survey data, there's loads of examples. With that, there's often quite a lot of processing of the data beforehand, because what people expect to do that we've found is they want to maybe say, so let's look at a cohort of people and let's see, so the people who answered strongly agree to question 2, what was their response to question 4? So when you build that sort of, if you want that sort of interactivity, you need to think very carefully about your data structure. It often involves pivoting the data and then rejoining it to itself, so that you've got like combinations of rows and columns that will give you that result. But in terms of visualizing the data, it's very nice to do your Likert scales as, you know, a cold to warm, like stacked bar or something like that. And then we can kind of serve up, you know, the proportions of people who've answered like that, and like how different cohorts compare across different answers like that. So yeah, it's used, survey data's used quite a lot with Tableau.
Wonderful. We've got a few more minutes, so if you do have a question, please feel free to ask that now, either privately in chat or in chat general, or unmute your line if you would like to. Okay, Steve, it looks like you've done an exceptional job there. Not too many questions. Just another reminder, folks, please take a moment to register for the next webinar, which is taking place on the 9th, which is a nice follow-on to this webinar as we start to run the series on a quick start to Tableau. So that's taking place on the 9th and is available to you. All of our recordings are hosted on a Wistia site, which you will have the link to. So if you go to any previous communications, we always provide a link to that site, and we'll be popping this webinar up there in the next week or so. But for now, thank you so much for your time. It's much appreciated. Steve, thank you for another excellent Tableau versus Excel session. And we hope to see you all on next week's call. Thank you.